Here is an overview of the sheep brain. If we start on the outer surface of the brain, we see this tough material here. This is the dura mater. The dura mater is the outermost covering of the meninges. When we peel back the dura mater, we see a few things. We have the dural folds here, you can see, which are these indentations of the dura that actually project into spaces like the longitudinal fissure. This would be what's called the falx cerebri, that divides the right and left cerebral hemispheres. And then this projection here is called the tentorium cerebelli because it's that tent we talked about, or that hammock that sits between the cerebrum and the cerebellum to separate the two. On the underside of the brain, we see a few things here. Let me point out to you. Here is the pituitary gland, right? It is sitting above the pons and the medulla. Right above the pituitary, you'll have the optic chiasm, and the optic nerve projects out of either side of the optic chiasm, heading out towards the eyeballs. So the eyeball would be here. This is the fat that's at the back of the eye socket. Okay, so these are some of the structures on the underside. If we open the brain up, we can see the other structures that we need to take a look at. So starting at the front here, we have the corpus callosum. This region right here, this white region at the top, that is the largest commissural tract. That's the one that crosses from right to left. This is the tract that we talked about that was cut in the example of the epileptic patient who had the split brain that we were talking about in class. So there's your corpus callosum. If you look beneath that, you see the lateral ventricles. The lateral ventricle is the space inside the cerebral hemispheres, and inside of there would be the blood vessels that make up the choroid plexus. So that's what produces the cerebrospinal fluid in the lateral ventricles. So here's our lateral ventricle. Our third ventricle, remember that's the really thin, the really narrow one that sits on either side or in between the two halves of the thalamus. So the thalamus is right here. Remember, it's really flat. So when you look at it from the front, really if a pin was here, I would just say, what's that structure? And you would say that that's the thalamus. I would have to specifically ask what ventricle would be located here in order for you to know that I was talking about the third ventricle. But the third ventricle would be located here. The cerebrospinal fluid then flows into the cerebral aqueduct. Let's see. Sorry, my camera got fuzzy here. There we go. The cerebral aqueduct is this path that you can see passing in the midbrain, and it connects down towards the fourth ventricle, which is here at the base of the cerebellum. So we have lateral ventricles, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, and fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle then connects into the central canal that goes into the spinal cord. Let's take a look at a few other structures. Let's see, I'm missing the pineal gland. Oh no, sorry, in this one it must have come out. So the pineal gland is the little ball that sits right here at the very back side of the thalamus, under the backside of the underside of the lateral ventricle. If you look, the other structure of the midbrain that you guys needed to look at were the colliculi. And you can see them here. So when you pull the cerebellum down, you can see those four bumps. So the top two are the superior colliculi. The bottom two are the inferior colliculi. And you can see them here as well. I'll show you this way. So superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. You can also see it from the middle. Again, superior and inferior colliculus. So right above the cerebral aqueduct. Those are the regions responsible for the visual reflex of turning the head when you see a bright light, and the auditory reflex of turning the head when you hear a loud noise. All right. Now when we come down past the midbrain here, we get to the pons, which is the bump on the underside of the brain. So here's the pons, and then this larger straight section is the medulla that you would move into before you start into the spinal cord. So we have cerebellum also. This is the part responsible for the coordination of all of our skeletal muscle movements. That's the cerebellum right here. So I'll go through real quick again. Corpus callosum, lateral ventricle, thalamus, that includes the third ventricle, hypothalamus, I think I missed that earlier. That would be this section below the thalamus that's leading towards the optic chiasm. Again, pineal body would be sitting right here. I'm sorry about that. Here's the midbrain that includes the cerebral aqueduct, inferior colliculus, and superior colliculus. Then we move down to the pons and the medulla. That includes the connection. Remember, the medulla is where that point of decussation is, where the motor and sensory fibers cross over before it enters the spinal cord. So hopefully that helps you give an idea of the sheep brain. Again, we'll be able to see them in class, but if you have any questions, let me know.